Good morning. This is the 31st and last day of October. Welcome to the Daily Post. Some thoughts and ideas and scriptures to hopefully help you through the day. The scripture for this morning comes from Psalm 70 and verse 4. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee, and let such as love thy salvation say continually, let God be magnified. Now you might recognise this as the same scripture that we had yesterday, although the words are the same, but it's from a different psalm. The psalmist thought it was so important that he actually repeated it somewhere else. So we should take notice, I guess. If you're reading the Bible in a year, today we need to move on through Jeremiah chapters 22 and 23 and the first chapter of Titus. Thoughts of the day. There are more tears shed over answered prayers than over unanswered prayers. He who falls in love with himself will have no rivals. Probably not a healthy place to be though, just the same. Integrity is staying true to your inner voice and having the stillness to actually be able to listen to it. The motivational thought for today: an achievement can be a bondage. It obliges one to strive for higher achievement. On this day in 1517, Martin Luther sent his 95 Theses to Albrecht van Brandenburg, the Archbishop of Mainz, precipitating the Protestant Reformation. In 1862, on this day in America, Nevada became a state. In 1876, Great Bakarangi cyclone of 1876 ravaged British India, modern-day Bangladesh, on this day, killing over 200,000 people. In 1888, on this day, Scottish inventor John Boyd Dunlop patented pneumatic bicycle tyres. In 1915, for the first time during World War I, British troops wore steel helmets on this day. In 1917, World War I, the Battle of Beersheba in southern Palestine took place. It was the last successful cavalry charge in history, and it was carried out by the 4th Australian Light Horse Brigade. In 1923, on this day, began 160 consecutive days of heat of over 100 degrees, that's 30 Fahrenheit, 38 degrees centigrade, at Marble Bar in Australia. In 1940, on this day, the official end of the Battle of Britain. This was a 6-month fight for control of the skies over Britain during World War II. The Royal Air Force lost 915 aircraft. The German Luftwaffe lost 1,733. Losing the battle would have left Britain vulnerable to a full invasion by German forces who had already overrun most of continental Europe. In 1992, Don Keller made his 18,000th skydive on this day. In 1992 also, then Pope John Paul II acknowledged the errors committed by the Catholic Church while dealing with Galileo Galilei in the 17th century. In 2011, on this day, the world's official population reached 7 billion, around about this day. The United Nations Population Fund designated today, or this day in 2011, as the Day of 7 billion. The personal story of the day, a fresh look at an old story. Balaam is a slightly obscure character in the story of the Bible. He was a wicked prophet who lived around the time of Moses' death. And much like the animated character Shrek, Balaam had a talking donkey as a sidekick. One day, Balaam was travelling to do something God didn't want him to do, so God sent an angel to oppose him. Balaam didn't see the angel, but the donkey did. At the sight of God's angel, Balaam's donkey refused to move forward. The false prophet got angry and started to beat the donkey. This happened 3 times, and the donkey was about to be slain by Balaam. Then things got rather weird, because the donkey protested the beating and impending doom in speech. Once the donkey spoke, Balaam finally noticed the wrathful angel of God. Balaam was so surprised by the angel that he completely overlooked the talking donkey. It's probably not a good prophet that doesn't notice that his donkey can talk, then wants to kill him for backchatting and refusing to do what he wanted. How much would a talking donkey be really worth? It seems that ignorance was a trait that the failed prophet had mastered. He wasn't all that bright. The Bible doesn't specify whether or not the donkey sounded like Eddie Murphy, but I like to think that maybe he did. The devotional thoughts of the day. He is chosen by God. The scripture is from Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 5, references from Hebrews chapter 5 verses 1 to 10. So also, Christ glorified not himself to be made an high priest, but he that said unto him, Thou art my son, today I have begotten thee. Recently, a prominent university professor lost his job when the college administration discovered that he had consistently lied about his credentials. This was especially true of his military record and the details of his service in military conflict. He had not, in fact, even served in the military, much less been decorated with medals. He claimed honours for himself that he had no right to claim. Our scriptures today want us to understand that the role of high priest has never been open to anyone based on their own claims to be an adequate mediator between God and humanity. Instead, one may hold this position only by God's call. This is important for us to grasp if we're going to have proper confidence to go to Jesus as our intercessor before God, as suggested in verses 15 and 16. We may think Jesus' qualifications to serve are self-evident, but from the standpoint of Mosaic law, Jesus isn't qualified because he wasn't from the tribe of Levi. Hebrews reminds us that ultimately God's call really makes one a high priest. God has the right to appoint whomever he desires as high priest. As we've seen before, Hebrews doesn't simply dismiss the Old Testament. Rather, this book is filled with quotations from the Old Testament, demonstrating that the Old Testament itself looks forward to a time when God would bring something new. God has not, in appointing Jesus as high priest, reversed himself. We find in the Old Testament itself that God would appoint his son as a priest in the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews chapter 5 and verses 5 and 6. Jesus is truly qualified to serve as our high priest, not because of his lineage, but because of God's call. Jesus is a superior high priest to any that has come before. In the past, God called those from the line of Aaron to serve. These men were never perfect, and they needed to have sacrifices offered on their own behalf. Verses 1 to 3. Jesus is perfect, and he serves eternally. Verses 8 and 10. Our high priest is no impostor, but perfectly and completely qualified to represent our requests to God. We only have one devotional thought for today, so let's move on, and we'll have a couple of jokes. Catholic school cafeteria, and there was a plate of apples, and one of the teachers placed a little notice in front of the tray of apples, and it said, Only take one. God is watching. Further down the line was a tray full of cookies, and a little boy had made his own notes. Take all you want. God is watching the apples. There was an elderly couple who in their old age noticed that they were getting more forgetful, so they decided to go to the doctor. The doctor said to them, you should start writing things down so you don't forget. They went home and the old lady said to her husband, I'd like a bowl of ice cream. You might want to write that down. And the husband said, no, I can remember that. I don't need to write it down. You want a bowl of ice cream? And she said to her husband, well, I would like a bowl of ice cream with some whipped cream on it. You better write that down. And he said, no, I can remember. You want ice cream and a bowl with whipped cream. And the old lady said, well, yep, I want a bowl of ice cream with whipped cream and a cherry on top. Write it down. And the husband said again, no, I got it. I know what you want. You want ice cream in a bowl with whipped cream and a cherry on top. So he went out to get the ice cream and he spends an unusually long time in the kitchen, about 30 minutes. He comes out to his wife and handed her a plate of bacon and eggs. And the old woman looked stunned. And she looked around and she said, where's the toast? The first product to have a barcode on it was Wrigley's chewing gum. Oak trees do not produce acorns until they are at least 50 years of age. The closing thought for today: be thankful that the kids are at home, lying about watching TV. They could be out on the streets. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that the Daily Post will help you through the day, and we hope you have a blessed day. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Bye for now.